Hi, David here, and this is the first episode of the summer break. So I just wanted to let you know that for these next 4 weeks, I'll be sharing treasures from the vault based on the listener's preference of the past episodes of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. So happy listening and, very importantly, happy sharing.
I think the biggest question for a lot of people is I'm getting this biology degree, even at the undergrad level, I'm getting this biology degree, I'm getting this PhD, but really I don't want to work in a lab or I don't want to teach. I want something that pays well because, notoriously academia doesn't pay well. It's so funny that that's the path that everybody thinks they need to pursue, yet it doesn't pay so well. But, if you have a calling for it, then that's fine.
Welcome to this week's episode of Papa PhD. This week with me I have Dr. Gertrude Nonterah, and you can call her G. G is a biomedical scientist, college instructor, science communicator, and author. She's the host of the Create and Prosper podcast, where she interviews experts and shares tips on how to make money as a writer and author. G also started the Bold Biomed, a YouTube channel that provides tips on the PhD life, career, and productivity for students in the biomedical sciences. When she's not doing any of these things, G enjoys a good spy movie. Welcome to Papa PhD, G.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, I really appreciate you having accepted my invitation. Because we're going to have a conversation about all you've been doing in this domain of helping PhDs. And as you know, Papa PhD, the mission of the podcast is to bring PhDs, like early PhDs, almost finishing PhDs, people with PhDs, information, insights on how to deal with all of the unknown that comes, especially by the end of a PhD, just before, just after, but also tips and tricks to make the most of their life as a PhD researcher. So I'm really, really grateful that you're here today. And I must say I'm really, really grateful. This is beginning of 2021. Let me just state gratefulness for something a little bit larger than me, which is the community on LinkedIn. It's amazing. That's where we met. That's where we crossed paths.
Yes.
And I'm really, really grateful for how much love, how much help you can find in a community that, if you're an academic or a young PhD student, you might think, oh, this is a business network. It's not for me. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, having both of us having been through the PhD process, you outside of the university walls and outside of academia, you don't see much. You don't see other PhDs on other career paths. You don't hear about their entrepreneurial paths, or you don't hear about how they left academia. So, and definitely when I was a PhD, I felt like my only choice was to stay in academia, right? Mm-hmm. People, and then you feel a sense when you realize, well, maybe my only path is academia. You begin to feel a sense of helplessness as you realize that maybe you don't like research and that you don't want to go on that path. So really what I'm passionate about so many things, but one of the things I'm absolutely passionate about is letting PhD students and even letting PhD graduates also realize that there is so much that your PhD does for you, and so many doors your PhD can open for you, and that you just have to explore that. And so I'm excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, me too. And I'm really want to go to dive into these questions that you asked. But let's start by the beginning. How did you get to where you are today? What was the journey of G. Nonterah from, being a bachelor's student into going to her PhD and now getting to where you are today, writing, teaching about writing, but also coaching people and helping people go through their graduate school life?
Yeah. So great question. So first of all, I want to say thank you for having me again, David. It's a privilege to be on the Papa PhD podcast. So a little bit about me. in 2012, well, in 2009, I started as a PhD student at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And when I started, my thought process, I had already gotten a bachelor's degree in nursing, and I thought I may want to maybe teach, or I wasn't really. Actually, to be honest, I now looking back, I don't think I was completely clear on what my professional path was, but I did know I wanted to get more education, and I knew that a PhD was going to be a good path. So I applied for a PhD, got into a PhD program, and it was great. I had a great advisor. I had a good experience. But somewhere along the line, I realized that research wasn't the path I wanted. I didn't want to become a principal investigator of a lab. I didn't want to run my own lab because my PhD was in microbiology and immunology, and we have labs and we run experiments. But then what actually even got me on the path I'm on now was, I think this was in 2011 or 2012. I went to the lab one Saturday evening to do an experiment, and I was on the internet. So one of the things I was doing at the time was, even though I was earning some money as a PhD student from my stipend, it wasn't a whole lot, especially because I was married. And at the time, my husband had lost his job. So there was a little bit of financial stress. And so I was like, okay, I want to find something that I can do maybe on a weekend, maybe 1 or 2 times a day on a weekend, to make some extra money, right?
Yeah.
And then if I'm able to make some extra money, then all I was looking for at that time was, I just want to make maybe an extra $100. And if I can make an extra $100, that would take care of some of the financial stress. Well, when I went online, what I found kind of shocked me, because I found out that there were people actually doing all kinds of work online and getting paid. So it was from there that I learned about freelancing, which we may talk about. I learned about blogging and how people would put affiliate links on their websites and make money through affiliate links, and you could essentially blog about anything and be able to, and not just anything, but anything that people were interested in, you could create content around. And if you did a good job of providing free value, then you could monetize through maybe offering your coaching or offering freelancing services or selling digital products like ebooks to them. So that's how I really got started, right? How I really got interested in this whole world of online. I wasn't really an online person. I think back then I only had Facebook, and I didn't even check it that much, you know. So when I found out, I started a blog on the different experiments I was doing in the online business world. And so I would do something and I would write about it, and do something and then I would write about it. And over time, I built up an audience doing that. That was my first blog. I no longer run that blog, but at the peak of that blog, I think I was getting around 20 to 30,000 visits per month. So it became pretty big. So then somewhere in 2017, at this point, I had finished my PhD. We had moved to San Diego, California. And again, I was looking for some other way, because I've always been very entrepreneurial, I guess. And I was just like, okay, I already started this blog. It's beginning to do well. So what are some other ways what are the ways I can begin to make some money? And I landed on freelance writing. So in 2017, I started a freelance writing business. That was a lifesaver, because in 2018, I was a postdoc at a university, and I was told that funding had run out. And so in 90 days, we were all going to lose our jobs.
Oh my.
So just imagine that, you know, you go to work one day, your boss is like, I'm so sorry, guys, but we're out of money, and in 90 days, you're going to lose your job. So it really showed me that there's no job that is secure. You may think you have a secure job, but you're only one funding away from being told, you know, funding, you could be just one step away from being told that funding is gone, and therefore you no longer have a job. But thankfully, I had built that freelance writing business, and so once that job ended, I was able to slide right into it. And that freelance writing business is what I've currently built a business and brand around. That's what my YouTube channel, my first YouTube channel, Gertrude Nonterah Writes, is about. And I just show people, hey, there is some money to be made in writing. And I know, David, you mentioned earlier on that you've also been a writer. And so there is money to be made in writing. You just have to keep going. It's not easy when when you're in a freelance position, but that freelance position and that freelance situation I created for myself actually supported my family for several years. Currently, I actually just started a full-time role as a writer with an agency that serves life sciences and health companies, which that's my background anyway. So I bring a lot of value. I'm so grateful to be there, and I know that my background is going to be helpful. But that's, in a nutshell, is my journey from accidentally stumbling on online entrepreneurship back in 2012 to now 2021 being on this podcast with you.
No, it's quite amazing. But the stories tend to be like that. From what I've seen, you can make sense of them looking back. But as you couldn't predict what was going to happen at the time.
Right.
There's an incident, there's a conversation you have in an elevator with someone, and then something materializes from there. Now, I'm really, really curious about maybe some details of how you kind of you said you. Let's start with the freelancing. The freelancing. I'm sure a lot of people out there are already blogging, those or have a Twitter account where they share, kind of like you were saying. But today, people will do it on Twitter, right? A Twitter account or an Instagram account where they'll share stuff about their day-to-day in the lab or in research. But to start having freelance jobs as a writer, can you talk a little bit about how you went about getting that first contract and putting yourself out there and getting some visibility?
Yeah, that's really, really good. So actually, when I started out, as a social media manager when I started freelancing. So as a in my role as a social media manager, the first job I got was from Craigslist. So my husband knew, because at that time I had been blogging for about a year, and I told him, I said, hey, I think I'm gonna start this freelance writing business. So if because we had a young son, we still have a young child, but he was maybe 2 years old, and so my husband was a stay-at-home dad and helping to take care of him. So I said, hey, whilst maybe my son is taking a nap, our son is taking a nap, could you check out things for me? I didn't even really say that, but he was looking for different jobs for freelance writing for me. So he went on Craigslist and saw that somebody had posted about needing a writer, and then emailed it to me whilst I was still at work. And so I was like, oh, this is great. So I applied for that freelance writing position, but never got it. But that same day, somebody else had posted about needing a social media manager. And because I had been writing my blog and I needed to build an audience for my blog, I had also been building concurrently a social media following. So I knew how to build a social media following. So I reached out to the person and said, hey, I'd be happy to handle your social media for you. Here is my blog. Here's my Twitter. Here's my Facebook. This is what I've done. If you like what you see, let me know. And that same evening, they got in touch with me and said, I love your blog, I love your Twitter, I love your Facebook, come and do social media for me. So that was my first foray into freelancing. And this individual ended up, so I began to write social media content, but more importantly, she began to refer me to other clients who needed blog posts and such. And so that's really how I got started.
Was this on Craigslist too, or was this from another source?
It was on Craigslist. So like I was saying, my husband had sent me that link on Craigslist.
And then you saw another one.
And then I saw another one.
I see.
The original one he sent me never responded back to me.
Well, that's how things work. Cool. So you can just kind of start by offering someone your services. But not to a company, maybe to someone who has a small business and needs help with the skill that you have.
Absolutely. And I think a small business can be a good place to start because most of the time the big businesses that you think about, like the billion-dollar companies, will want to work with an agency, for instance, and not necessarily an independent freelancer. And that's an important thing to know. If you want to work with the bigger companies, you kind of have to know somebody to do that, right? And I would learn that later. So I found that as somebody that had no connections at any big company, it was better for me to target local companies and smaller businesses that needed my services, but maybe they didn't have $10,000 a month to pay an agency, but they would have $500 a month to pay a freelancer, right? And $500 a month will make a lot of difference for a lot of people, I believe, So that's how I got started. Yeah. So I think targeting those small businesses is good. Yeah.
Perfect. Now, I imagine also you can. This might be complicated, but there's labs that need a website or that need someone to manage a Twitter account. Maybe around you in your institution where you're doing your research, maybe you can, but you can do something like that. But it'll probably be for free anyway.
Yes,
I'm thinking of ways people can start, try their hand at this.
And something, I agree with you on that point. I totally agree with you, David. The reason why I agree with you is because when you're starting out and you don't have any experience, it's good to start out with some, like I said earlier, I started out with my blog and with my Twitter. That was completely free. Nobody was paying me. Yeah. But if you can get, and I actually have recommended this to people. I said, if you can get, like you're saying, in a lab in your institution, maybe your own lab, and say, hey, I think we would benefit by having a Twitter and getting people to know a little bit more about our research. I know some PIs are very protective of their ideas. It may be funny, but you may get a PI that says, okay, go ahead, do that. And then you begin to start conversations, and that can grow really quickly. So even when you have those opportunities, right, I think you should take advantage of them, because later on you can use it as proof that you've done the work before.
Yeah, and if, of course, like what you just said, eventually people will start asking you, okay, can I have a sample of what you've written? Can I have they kind of want you to see your portfolio, right? So that's when it's gonna count. 1 year, 2 years later, you're gonna have this, this treasure of stuff that you can show right away. Now I have a question, and I think I know what you're gonna say, but because of what you said you're very entrepreneurial, but time management. When we're doing a PhD in microbiology, genetics, cell biology, if we want to do something on the side, we need to be very good with our time, right? How did you manage that? Plus a child, plus, how did you, what advice do you have for let's say moms that are doing their PhD, but they also want to start some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor?
Yes. Oh my goodness. This is such
a big issue,
question. No, it's such a great question. Okay. So I think the question you're asking is managing your time when you're so busy, right? And I think that's such a great question. I think, in the beginning, let me tell you, at the time I started this, yes, I had a 2-3-year-old. And one of the things that I did is really, I waited for him to go to sleep. And then when he went to sleep, I would take the hours between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. to build my business.
Okay.
So, and then there were days where I woke up super early. So I'd be up by 4 or 5 a.m. and I'd work to maybe 6 or 7. And then I would work on my business. That's how I wrote most of my blog posts. That's how I when I started out freelancing. That's how I managed my clients. I always did things in the fringes of time when my son was asleep. So, and because I also had a full-time job, and,
that's it.
One of the things you don't want to be doing is cheating your boss by doing your own business on work time. It's not a good thing. I wouldn't do that, but I find that there is so much you can do in just 2 hours a day. People underestimate how much you can do. And I think it's because we live in the Netflix culture where we can sit down and binge watch a show for 5 hours and it can feel like time never passed. But the truth is that if you will even focus on one thing for like 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, you'll be amazed at what you can do. So to those moms out there that, you're busy, you have a full-time job, you have, your family, and you have other things too, because family and work is usually not the only two facets of life. You have so much more, I would say that find 2 hours in your day, or if all you have is an hour, find an hour of your day. And during that time, focus. I always used to tell people that every business that you can think about, the coffee shop in your local city or your local town has working hours, right? They usually have working hours posted. So set working hours for yourself. It's hard. I'm not the most personally, I don't think I'm the most disciplined person, but I learned to work for 1 hour sprints and to focus on my work. So I shut off all social media. I'm not checking YouTube or anything. I just focus on my work because I knew what I wanted. So knowing what you want and setting aside time to do it is so critical.
This question of focus and of tuning out all the noise in our day-to-day is something that's really, really timely and really, really hard to do today. Before we go back into that with my conversation with Gertrude Nonterah, I just wanted to ask you a question. Do you know of or do you work for an organization that might be a great sponsor for the show? If you do, I'd love to hear about it. It could be an organization you'd like to see promoted on the show, or it could be a service you feel could be helpful to all the listeners out there. Whatever it is, you can write to david@papaphd.com, and I'll be happy to talk about it with you, and also I'll give you a shout out on the show. And now let's go back to my conversation with Gertrude Nonterah. I think you just pointed something very, very important, which is first that there's these times where if you have kids, when they're asleep, then you can have these moments of peace and clarity. For me, I think the ones that's always surprised me the most are the morning hours. If I'm able to wake up, let's say at 5 or somewhere around 5 before the kids wake up, it's amazing what you can get done and how clear you can think at that time. But some people are more night owls, so maybe it's going to be that 9 to 11, like you said. That's going to be key. But and I'm saying this, and I have a hard time with it. And now having a podcast, posting on managing social media, shutting down social media can be a big challenge.
It is. I agree. It is. One of the things that I did to help me, I remember when I had been doing social media management for about a year, and then I was beginning to get questions on, how do I become a social media manager? One of the things I did was I wrote a book, a mini book, and sold it on my website. That's one of the ways I started making money from my blog. Now, how did I write that book? That book was a short book. It was maybe 8,000 words. But then what I did was I had this Google Chrome extension called Forest. And with Forest, when you start using Forest, you can set a timer for like 45 minutes, and you can set it so it blocks your access to social media. So that's exactly what I did. So every time I would get distracted and try to go on Facebook, it would put up a black screen and say, "You're still working."
I love it. That must exist still, right?
It does. It does. You should look for it. It's pretty good.
But the cool thing is that, and tell me if this is what happened with you, is after a certain time, your body, your mind, the whole you gets used to this routine, and you ended up not needing Forest anymore at a certain point.
Yeah, I think so. I still use it. I don't use it as much anymore, but I still use it, especially on those days where I'm like, I need to focus on this really so that I can get things done. I also, another productivity tool that I use, and my husband does not get this, and many people don't, is I will listen to instrumental music in my ears, because when I do that, there is this channel on YouTube called Calmed by Nature. You should look it up. Anybody should look it up who's listening. But essentially, he has all these sounds. So sometimes it's like the sound of a wind chime, or it's like the sounds of a coffee shop. And so what I do is I have these big headphones. I'll put it over my head. And so essentially, I have blocked out everything around me except for the coffee shop sounds. And then now I can focus on whatever I'm doing. Especially I do this especially when I'm writing. I can just focus on that and not worry about anything that is going on around me. And usually when I'm able to do that for an hour, usually by the end, I'm so shocked at what I'm able to do. So whatever works for you, whether it's the Chrome extension, or whether it's blocking your ears, or whether it's just you don't listen to anything, but you put earbuds in your ear so that you don't hear anything, and then you turn off your phone, so that you're not tempted to go to your phone. All that's helpful. Another thing too, there's a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I don't know if you've read it, David, but it's a really good book. It's a good book about building good habits. And one of the things that the author James Clear writes about is the fact that sometimes you need to remove yourself from the place where you're most tempted to give into a distraction, right? So for instance, if you know that you would really want to write or really want to work on something, instead of laying on your bed and turning on your laptop, get up from your bed, go and sit at a desk and set everything up like it's a professional thing that you're doing, right? Because it is professional, and work on it like it's serious like that, instead of trying to kind of relax and do it. And that also is helpful.
Okay, to have like work cues around you versus relax cues.
Yes. Yes.
Now that's super interesting, and I'll definitely I'll remember to maybe insert that in the show notes. I think it's a good recommendation. Now, maybe we can go back a little bit to your PhD postdoc years, and because I know that now, especially on your YouTube channel, you provide tips to PhDs, and I imagine those tips are based on your experience, on what you lived, on what worked for you, and for people who are still, doing or maybe even considering a PhD, I'd like to kind of have a little snapshot of maybe questions that you've had that come again and again. What are things that are like generally issues for people, or questions or doubts that come back to you on this channel of communication you have with the PhD community?
With the PhD community, right? Okay. So with the PhD community, I think I've gotten more, because that's a much newer brand I'm building. I just started that maybe 6 months ago or so. So it's still new. But one of the questions, but this is great because I'm thinking about and looking at questions. Like for instance, early this morning, the Bold Biomed channel, I saw a question somebody had posted, and the question was, it was a video I had done on the different career paths you can pursue as a biology major. And the person had asked me about the biopharmaceutical industry and how, all the different paths that potentially are there, right? So now this is something that I have to go and research and maybe talk to some people, because even though I know about the biopharmaceutical industry, I don't know everything about it. So I'll go find out about it, right? And so I think the biggest question for a lot of people is I'm getting this biology degree, even at the undergrad level, I'm getting this biology degree, I'm getting this PhD, but really I don't want to work in a lab, or I don't want to teach. I want something that pays well, because, notoriously academia doesn't pay well. It's so funny that that's the path that everybody thinks they need to pursue, yet it doesn't pay so well. But if you have a calling for it, then that's fine. I think that's the case for a lot of the people, is the fulfillment that you get from teaching, from bringing up new generations of scientists. I think it kind of weighs on the other side of the scale versus the salary per se.
but I agree with you, and that's why I'm here behind this mic on Papa PhD. Is I also saw the same, which was people, and I also come from the biological sciences. People wondering what's going to happen next, and am I going to have to just go serve at a cafe? Is that what's waiting for me if I don't get to the professoriate and tenure track, etc., and you and I both know that that's not true. And like I was mentioning LinkedIn just at the top of the episode, and just there's so many PhDs in so many different positions, right?
Yes.
It's quite amazing, and so I think you're right. That's one of the main pain points, maybe I can say it like that the community has. But then we're talking about biological sciences. There's history PhDs. There's I don't know, linguistics, literature, and the percentage of people in those different domains that can stay in academia vary, but there's always a portion, at least 50% of them, that end up going to do someone else. I always refer to my first guest of this season, Chris Humphrey, who has a PhD in medieval studies and is now a project officer in a bank, right? In the banking domain.
Yeah, no, and that's excellent. And you see, I think one day my husband was telling me this story about how he met his religion professor, and this man had a PhD, and a few years later he saw him as a janitor in a place, and he was confused at first, so he called his name, and he turned and he was like, "Oh, hey," and he mentioned my husband's name. And I remember my husband telling me, he's like, "My heart broke," and even as my husband was telling me that story, my heart broke, because it's like, this is a highly qualified person who needs to be doing something that his qualifications are worth, but he couldn't find a position. And so I'm not saying being a janitor is not a good job. It's good work, it's honest work, right? But I at that point I felt, wow, I feel like he deserved more, right, for what he had done. And so that's where my passion lies, is in PhDs realizing that you're highly qualified and there's so much you can do, and that you don't have to see the world so narrowly. So like in the case of Chris, who I'm also connected to on LinkedIn, he was able to turn a PhD in medieval studies into a position at a bank. And so people don't realize all the skills that we PhDs learn, whether your PhD is in biomedical sciences or chemistry or history or whatever it is, we come with so many skills. I always say PhDs, we are the bosses of learning. We can learn anything and everything, right? Like if we can't, that's what a whole PhD is, to figure things out. So even having that problem solving mindset is a big skill that so many companies in business, so many companies in finance, companies in the pharmaceutical industry, chemical industry, they need that so badly. And you come as a PhD, you come with those skills, right? There also may be different software or programs that you've learned within your PhD program, even how to look up peer-reviewed journals. That's a skill. Not everybody has that. And so highlighting those, can we call them soft skills, I guess? Those skills that are, some of them are not so soft, because knowing how to use some kind of software is not soft. It's it's a hard skill. But those unique skills, a lot of us PhDs learn it in our journey as PhD students. And so being able to highlight that on your resume, on your CV, is so important to opening doors for you outside of the ivory tower. If you want to stay in the ivory tower, that's fine. But if you are finding yourself in a place where you want to explore outside of it, there's so much. And by highlighting your skills, and even by exploring like freelance paths like both David and I have, could be a way for you to even get your foot in the door. So, there's so much out there, and I hope more people will explore that.
Mhm. I agree with you. The freelance path is one, and because what happens if you go, let's say, to industry, very often they'll ask for so many years of experience, and you just you can make the point that, well, during my the years of my PhD can count as experience, but often the people hiring, they won't really go for that right away. So I would say, there's two things, and tell me if let's discuss about this. I always think, coming out of PhD, going into a domain that's more commercial, more industrial, you need to have some humility, and because the PhD, for them, they know what it is. Kind of, they probably don't know all your transferable skills, or they're not conscious of them, but they know what they want. They know who they want and what skills they want the person to have. So I would say, go in with humility, go in ready to work, have a first position that's maybe not at the level that you aspire, and then prove yourself once you're inside the organization, and then you'll quickly you'll quickly go up the chain, or the ladder, let's say. What's your idea on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I've seen a lot of posts on LinkedIn recently with people saying that, your PhD is work experience too, which is true, because most of us in our PhDs are working 8 to 12 hours every single day, right? So I agree with that. But like you rightly said, not many HR people or people within companies have caught up to that idea just yet. And so while that is still good and you can demonstrate your transferable skills, I think exactly, David, that if you do get in a role that is a role that you want to get into, or even, I heard this incredible story. Let me just take a small, it's not a side journey, it's on the same line, but I was listening, I'm on Clubhouse, which is a new social media audio app, and I don't go there often, but I was in this really great room where the guy he had only a bachelor's degree and was working at marketing at Procter and Gamble. Now, to get into a role in marketing at Procter and Gamble, you need to have a PhD.
Okay.
Most of the people who have
that's a requirement?
It's like that. It's not even a requirement. It's the way that the whole system has been built. That a lot of the marketing people at Procter and Gamble have PhDs, or at least, and usually they either have a PhD or they went to an Ivy League school.
Okay.
To get that position, because it's Procter and Gamble, right? Well, this guy doesn't even have a PhD or master's, did not go to an Ivy League school, and was there. And so we were asking him, so how did you get in? And he said, well, I got in as an intern. And I learned everything I could and impressed the bosses and stayed there and did all the things I needed to do. And now I'm in this role that most of the time would either go to somebody who went to an Ivy League school or has a PhD. So what's my point there? My point there is that what you need is a foot in the door, right? And once you have a foot in the door, you can fight like with everything within you to rise and to get to those roles that you finally want. And for a PhD, that path may even be shorter than somebody with a bachelor's. So somebody, I think he had been in the industry maybe 8-10 years, I think, before he got into that role. But for you with a PhD, it may take 3 years of impressing people, of showing people that, okay, your work is good and you are worth your salt, to get into those roles where where you feel like you want to get, right? Because everybody has different goals, where you feel you want to get. So I agree with you that there is some humility that plays into that, okay, I'm going to get my foot in the door, get into the company, if it's a dream company, for instance. And once I'm there, I'm going to learn everything I can. And this is where, talking, and this is where informational interviews within your company is important. This is where networking within your company and outside of your company is important. That's why I love LinkedIn so much. This is where, learn, personal improvement in your craft is important. That if you can improve at least 1% every day, within 3 years, you'll be an expert in your field. So I completely agree that there is some kind of humility there, that if you get into a role that is usually not the academic track, then really see yourself, this is an opportunity to get my foot in the door, and then do all the things, the networking and the relationship building and the personal development to get where you want to get. I agree. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
And I love that you mentioned LinkedIn, because I was going to go there. I was going to talk about networking and how important it is to start having conversation with these people who work in these companies that interest you. Because even then you can open door, you can access the hidden job market through there.
That's right.
In a different way. We're getting to the end of the interview. I think we could have talked for another hour, but maybe it can stay for another time. How can people find you? How can people reach out to you? We've mentioned LinkedIn, so I'm going to share the link for your LinkedIn profile in the notes page. But if people have questions for you after listening to the episode, they want to learn a little bit more about how to get into writing, how did you start your blog, etc., how can they reach out to you?
Yes, thank you so much, David. So if people wanted to learn more about my writing journey and or how they can get started in writing, freelance writing, you can go to G Nonterah Writes, which is my channel, or gnonterah.com. All right, that's where you'll find my podcast, as well as links to some blog posts that I write. But my YouTube channel link is also on there. So gnonterah.com, you can find me there. I also have a newsletter, so gnonterah.com/newsletter. You can go there and then join my newsletter. I send out weekly emails on content creation, writing, and creativity for those PhDs that are looking for some motivation to think outside of the academic box. Nothing wrong with the academic box. I'm just sharing content that there is life outside of academia. So if you would like to explore some of those ideas, I have another YouTube channel, the Bold Biomed, and so you can find me at the Bold Biomed, and now I have the boldbiomed.com, but it's not a website yet. But the Bold Biomed, you'll find me there, and you can interact with me there. Yeah. And before we go, I wanted to just emphasize the power of we were talking about this very briefly, and I feel like this could be a whole other episode, or the power of networking as a PhD student and also as a graduate, that it really is important. So come find me on LinkedIn as well. And these days I'm super busy, but we can set up like a 20-minute Zoom call, for instance, and we can chat. And I think that's actually very, very important, because like David said, there's a hidden job market. There's an estimated about 70% of jobs are in the hidden job market. That means that they actually go to people's referrals rather than getting posted publicly. So you don't want to just rely on publicly posted jobs. You can also access jobs that are never ever posted, by knowing people and by having relationships. You don't have to be everybody's best friend, but knowing the people is really helpful. So that's what I wanted to end on that note.
It's perfect. G, thank you so much for your time. I know you're extremely busy. I really appreciated this time talking with you. I think there's a lot of value in our conversation for listeners out there. Thank you so much for having accepted, and all the best for your projects.
Thank you so much as well, David.
And that's it for this week's episode of Papa PhD. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you a great week. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Papa PhD podcast. Head over to papaphd.com for show notes and for more food for thought about non-academic postgrad careers. I'll always be happy to share inspiring stories, new ideas, and useful resources here on the podcast. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts to always keep up with the discussion and to hear from our latest guests.